Today's daf we're going to be learning is Zevachim Daf Samach Vav. Finish the sixth chapter and get started with the new chapter. Although you're going to see that all these Mishnayot are all really intertwined, and we saw that already yesterday. Which is we started with the sugya where we basically said if you do Havdalah, you completely sever the head on the Chatat Oaf. Maybe it's a good idea before we even start to do a bit of a review. And I brought some of the main things. I actually cut a bit of the chart from yesterday because I wanted you to be able um, to see I wanted to highlight the major differences, even though there's more differences between the Ola and the Chatat, but maybe I'll go over some of them uh, just orally, even though they're not on the chart. But the main things, and these are important to know for today, the two main differences, even though there's a little more here, two main differences. In Olat Ha'of, okay, which is the burnt offering of a bird, you do Malika and you completely sever the head. You do both Simanim. Chatat Ha'of, you only do one Siman, and you're not supposed to, although that's exactly what we're discussing, to sever the head. Okay, and you're not supposed to do both Simanim. So that's difference number one. The other thing we talked about yesterday is that the critical elements of the Ola Ta'of is number one, the Milika with separating the head, and number two, the Mitsui Hadam from, right, that you have to do the squeezing of the blood from the head and from the body. By the way, I realized that there was something I didn't explain well in the Mishnah. So if we go quickly back to the Mishnah and Daf Samach Dal and Amud Bet, how do you do the Ola Ta'of? I'm going to quickly just run through it. You go up the kevesh, you go up the ramp, although we learned that there were two different opinions, that the Olat Ha'of is on top, right? And whether it's really on top or on the ledge. So that we saw there was a machloket. But that's another major difference, which I didn't put in the chart, between the Ola and the Chatat. The Ola is at the top, the Chatat's at the bottom. I keep trying to tell you this so you remember. Generally, the Chatat of the animal is on top because it says you have to do it on the four corners of the altar, which we saw a whole bunch of times, which means obviously it's at the top. The way you remember is the Chatat of the bird is flipped. That one's at the bottom, whereas the Ola is on the top, even though normally the Ola is on the bottom. Right? The only one at the top of the animals is the sin offering, right? The Chatat. But in the bird, it's flipped. So now you go up, you get to that southeast corner, unless there's no room, remember, and then you move to the southwest. Then you do Malika, Mimul, or Palm of Deal. You do the separating of the head. Mitzat Tamar Kira Mizbeach. Now, the Mitzvah Adam you do that point is from the body. Okay, I didn't clarify this the other day. I realized only that I missed something critical in this Mishnah when I was reading it. Natal et harosh. Here's the part I missed. You now take the head after you squeeze the blood from the body on the wall. Then you take the head. Hikif beit malikatolam is back. What that means is, this is the part I missed. You mekif usually means you go around, but that's not what it means here. You put the beit malika, meaning the place where it was, where you cut off the head, meaning from the head, and you put that up against the wall of the mizbech, and you squeeze out the blood in the head. That's the mitzoy adam of the head. Then you basically put the salt on, throw the head to the fire. Then you get to the body, you take out all those parts that we had a whole debate about yesterday, what exactly which parts, and how do you take them out. Then you throw those into the Beit HaDeshen, right? That's based on the Pasuk Kishlich, and that we had the whole thing about, how the Kohanim had to have very good aim and also very good throw. Low, right? And then we said, then you split the animal in half, but not completely. You just kind of cut part of it and you split it lengthwise so that you open it, and then you throw that on the altar and you burn it. Okay. Then the Mishnah had said, right? Then we basically said that we were dealing with this line. Hivdil b'chatav v'lo hivdil ba'olah pasul. The havdalah is critical. That's what we were up to. The severing of the head. Okay. These are the two parts of the olah ha'of that are important. Malika with mavdil and mitzui adam me'harosh v'me'aguf. So we're going to deal with both of them today. So we started yesterday with this long sugya about that the Mishnah, where it says you have to do it this way, and the Ola and the Chatat, one, right, the Chatat has to be not separated. You can't do both Simanim and sever the head. Well, that's not like Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Shimon, because Rabbi Shimon said, Shamati shemavdilim ba'of, okay, b'chatat of. I heard that you can do this. So then we had a whole debate, what's the machloket between them? And we said it's all based on the next Mishnah. Because the next Mishnah that we're going to see today basically says that if you did, one of the main lines is if you did a chata like an ola, it's disqualified. What does it mean to do a chata like an ola? We're assuming you're talking about malika. And if you do malika like the ola and you separate, it's disqualified, right? So then maybe now, maybe not, right? That was the whole thing. Maybe you could do the malika as long as you do the haza'ah differently, right? If you do the mitzvah differently, since the mitzvah is different, right? You don't have to do. Remember, in the in the chatat, you do first haza'ah, first you sprinkle, then you do mitzvah with the remainder. But if you do the mitzvah, right now, this was the whole question. One said mitzvah chatat of ma'akev. You have to do mitzvah. So, in other words, if you have to do mitzvah, then you'll do haza'ah and mitzvah, and then already it'll look different, and then you can do avdalah because it won't be olad ha'ov. Okay, and then we had two other explanations without going through everything because we'll never get through today's daf, but we have three explanations as to how somehow this machloket between Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, and the rabbis doesn't really have to do with the ikar din of when the Torah says lo yavdil, does it mean no, or does it mean, well, you can if you want? That wasn't the machloket. The machloket was, well, you're not supposed to, but if you do it, right, are you or are you not going to have another issue, which is now it looks like you're doing the chatara of like the ola, which you're not allowed to. So that was our whole explanation. Comes Rabbi Yirmiyah at the bottom of Samachem Bet and says, I'm a ruach kamed Rabbi Yirmiyah. So they told this whole machloket they were having. Does it have to do with Shia? Does it have to do with Rov, the Rov Basar? There were those different opinions. And it all has to do with the next Mishnah. So they said this in front of Rabbi Yirmiyah. Amar lo shmiya lehu hadam Rabbi Shimon ben Eliakim Yishumar belezer ben Pidam Yishumar belezer ben Shamoah. Okay, quoting three people. Okay, he says, didn't you hear what this person said, this person said, this person said about Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon? That Omer Haya Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon Shamati b'chatara of shemavdilim umay lo yavdil ein sarich lahavdil. Didn't you hear that Rabbi Shimon said, that Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon said, that you can do lahavdil, and why? Not having anything to do with the next Mishnah, the way you were all, suggesting. Lo yavdil means you don't need to lahavdil. When the pasuk says v'lo yavdil, it just means, well, what you did in the olat ha'of, that you separated the head, in this case, you don't have to do that. It doesn't mean you can't. Okay? It means you don't have to. Okay? So now, and then he basically disregards, based on this, all the previous shitot. Because what they're basically saying is, according to Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon, right, it's not an issue of can you or not do it because it's going to look like this and all that. It has nothing to do with that. It's just that he doesn't take it very literally. When it says don't separate the head, it doesn't mean don't, you can't, like most knows in the Torah. But no, it means you don't have to. Well, you have to deal. If you want to, you can. You don't want to, you don't have to. Either which way is totally fine. So Amalei, and that's a whole different explanation. So Amalei Rav Achabarit to Rav Rav Ashi Elameata. So now they're going to start questioning this explanation that Rabbi Yirmiyah brought. If you say don't means, in this case, means you don't have to, well, then I'm going to take another place where it says don't, and it's going to be very hard to translate it as you don't have to. Okay, now it's a very weird quote because it's a very different thing, and that's what the Gemara is going to and then say. You can't compare those two at all, but it's interesting that they even start with it. Elameata. From here, what are you going to say? Gabe bor. When it comes to a pit, okay, it says in the pasuk, Kiftach ish bor, if you open a pit in the ground, o kichreish bor, you dig a pit in the ground, v'lo yichasenu, and you don't cover it. That's going to be our keyword. V'nafal sham ashor chamor, and then ashor chamor falls. Right? What does it say? Bala bor yishalem. Right? The owner has to pay. So now, what are you going to say? V'lo yichasenu hachanami de'ein tzarich lechasod. You're going to say lo yichasenu means, well, you don't have to cover it if you don't want to. Of course you do, right? That's the whole point of the pasuk. You have to cover it. So the Gemara says, Hachi hashta, you can't compare that pasuk to our pasuk. Hatam, there it's very clear it means you can't, but you have to, meaning lo yichasenu means, and you didn't cover it when you should have. Hatam kevan dechtiv ba'ala bor yishalem. There it says the owner of the pit has to pay. Ilaveu derami lechasuya. Of course it's incumbent upon him to do that. So you can't read that pasuk that way and compare it. Aval hacha. Here, there's a different. Now, it's not just that we don't read it there, but now they're going to prove how we know this is what it means by us. Hacha michti ktiv vihikrivo. Now, vihikrivo is a word we already saw before. If you remember, we started on this yesterday in a different way. It says you could, if you bring an ola from birds, right? And it said tolim or bnei yonah in plural. The next pasuk said vihi krivo, and you sacrifice it, which was singular. And then we said, what does that mean? It means if you want to bring a voluntary bird offering, you could actually bring it with just one bird. You don't have to bring it in a pair. But now we're darshaning it differently. Hikrivo means you sacrifice it. That was our whole thing. It sounds singular. Now what they're saying is it means this and not something else. And now they're going to say, and in that pasuk was also talking about the malika and then the burning of the head, where it became clear that you sever the head from the body. So it says vihikrivo chalaka kachubin chatara of lo of. The pasuk specifically differentiated between the chatan and the ola. So lo yavdil lamali. What are we going to do then? Now, what it means there is already in the pasuk. Now, I just want to remind you, it never really says you have to separate the head from the body in the ola, and it specifically says by the chatat lo yavdil. But what they're going to say is, now we already learned yesterday that you can infer from the psukim about the ola that you do have to separate the head. And then we have this pasuk krivo. This is done in this manner, but something else is not done in this manner. Meaning, what else is there? If not for the sin offering of the bird, there's only two offerings of birds. One is an ola, one is a chatat. So the sin offering of the bird is not severing. You don't sever the head. That's the first mention of not severing the head is actually not in the chatat psukim. It's already in this word hikrivo. This one done in this way, but not the other one. In which case, lo yavdil lamali. So then why does it say lo yavdil? You don't really need that pasuk, lo yavdil. To which we learn from here, this is Rabbi Lazar Rabbi Shimon, Shma mina. So lo yavdil lamali, what do I need it for? Shma mina, ein sarich lavdil. So lo yavdil must not mean what it really seems to be meaning, which is you can't. Because if it did, you would have already inferred that from hikrivo. So the fact that it says lo yavdil must mean you don't have to. Okay? So in other words, hikrivo means you don't sever the head in the chatat. And the second mention of it tells, well, you could if you wanted to. It just really means you don't have to. Okay? And again, take it or leave it. I mean, you could obviously read this differently, but that's, and the Tanna Kama does. But that's Rabbi Lezer Rabbi Shimon's position. And that's Rabbi Yirmiyah. Basically, now it's not clear whether the Gemara completely rejects the three opinions we had yesterday, but it seems possible because it does say Shema Mina. It does seem to infer here. That's Rabbi Lezer Rabbi Shimon's position. Mitzah damaguf. Now we're going to end this chapter with the next line in the Mishnah. The Mishnah talked about if you did mitzoi haguf and not mitzah. I'll read the word in the Mishnah, the wording of the Mishnah. Mitzah damarosh. If you squeeze the blood from the ola, from the head, but you didn't squeeze it from the body, psula, it's disqualified. Meaning you have to do the blood in the body. But if it's the reverse, you did the body and not the head, it's actually fine. So now the Gemara is going to figure out where do we get this from. Tanu Rabbanan. So we're going to bring a braita that proves this. And with that, we'll finish the chapter. Ola. Now the last pasuk in the whole section of the Ola Ha'of says, okay, you shisau top knafa v'lo yavdil. That's not so important. Then you burn it on the fire. And then it says, Olahu, this is an Ola, which is very strange because it already said it's an Ola in the first pasuk. We know this is talking about an Ola. So why does it say Olahu Yisherech Nichoch Hashem? So we're now going to darshan those two words. Olahu. It's an Ola, this one. Okay. So Ola is going to be a general term that's going to include more things because Ola means, remember we learned it before somewhere else, Hiya Ola Mokdah, that if it goes, whatever you put on the altar gets to stay on the altar. Because Ola means once it goes, like we let it go. Okay? So Ola is going to say, this is coming to include a case where it's going to be an Ola anyway, even if you didn't do it exactly the way you were supposed to. And which case would that be? Where you squeeze the blood from the body and not from the head. Maybe it's the reverse, right? Maybe it should be if you did the head, but not the body. Talmud Lamal, who? Well, the word who comes to be exclusive. Who, it has to be done this way and not some other way. So from there, we have one word that includes more, one word that excludes. So we're going to say it's going to be good as long as you did the blood of the body. You don't need to do the blood of the head. So my Talmud, how do you get that? Now, the Gemara could have used a different term like mara'ita. It's a little arbitrary. Why that one, not that one? It's usually what they use when they want to do that. But what they want to really say is, how do you get it from these psukim? Okay, that's what my Talmud usually means. Even though usually it's going to be the my Talmud is usually answered with, here's why we can see from the pasuk. It must be that, must be including that, that must be including that. Here they're just going to bring a logical reason. It's just obvious because Amar Ravina mistabra derov damim beguf shchiche. it just makes sense because most of the blood is in the body. So if we're going to have one that's critical and one that's less critical, it's going to be the one in the body because the head doesn't carry most of the blood. Most of the blood is coming out of the body, and therefore the mitzui of the blood of the body must be the important part and the critical element. Okay, from there we finish Hadran alach Kodesh Kodeshim. Now we're starting the next chapter, although we're going to see the whole sugya is going to talk about the interrelation of all these mishnayot, the previous. We already tried to connect to this mishnah, although in the end, maybe it really isn't connected. And then we're going to move on to the next mishnah. I'm going to do something a little strange today. I'm going to learn this Gemara out of order a little bit because the last sugya we're going to get to today is premised on the next mishnah. And if you don't know that mishnah, it's very hard to understand what's happening. But anyway, we're not up to there yet. We're going to start now with the mishnah. Okay, so the first mishnah in the chapter, and then, like I said, we'll learn the second mishnah soon. So the first mishnah, and here I charted it all out, it's going to talk about all kinds of situations where you did something wrong. Okay, our favorite thing is to discuss, all sorts of things that go wrong. So, as we started our Masechet, Chatara of Sha'asa Alamata. Okay, the first case is actually the perfect case. You do the Chatara of, okay, we're going to have it split in half. Okay, we're going to have the Chatara of, then we're going to have the Olata of. So that's already splitting the Mishnah in two. Within each one, we're going to split it in half because we're going to have, okay, let's just remember, sin offering of the bird is done on the bottom part of the altar. And it's not supposed to be done on the top part. So the first set of cases is all going to be if you did them on the bottom, which is right. And the second bunch of cases is going to be what if you did them on top. Now, if you've ever played the game Set, okay, if you know the game Set, the way Set works is you have to, right, you have three colors, three shapes, three fillings of shapes, and three types of shapes. Okay, maybe I said that already. I don't know. But the way the game works is you're trying to mix and match, right? You always get a set as long as, right, two or the, right? You have to have each one the same or each one different. So this Mishnah reminds me of set. So if anyone knows the game, you'll get the connection. So what we're going to do is each time we're going to switch one thing. Okay, one thing's going to be different and the others are going to stay the same. So you have Naseh Lamata. The first thing we're going to do, all these sets are going to have, they were all done in the right place. But we're going to switch one of the following things. How did you do it? Like, did you do it like a chatat is done? And that would be lo yavdil, haza'at hadam, right? Sprinkling the blood, not squeezing of the blood. I mean, yes, squeezing the shirayim. Okay? And the other issue is going to be l'shem. Did you do it in the name of a chatat? That goes all to our lishma and lo lishma. Did you do it for the sake of the right korban? So the first case is the perfect case. You did a chatat of, asa alamata, Kima sechatat l'shem chatat. Okay, so you did it in the right place. It was down below. You did it for the same way a chatat's normally done, and you did it for the purpose of a chatat kshera. Okay, that's totally obvious. It's kshera. The reason why we're bringing it is to compare it to the second part. You'll see in a minute. If you did it also down below, which is the right place, but you did it kima sechatat l'shem olah. You did it like a chatat, but you had in mind that you were sacrificing it as an olah. So we already know a chatat shelo lishma is psula, disqualified. Kema aseh olah l'shem chatat. This we learned yesterday. If you did it like an olah, again, which we deliberated what that means, right? Does it mean you did, right, malika l'shem chatat, right? That was the whole thing. If you do malika with havdalah, we explained it as, right, in the name of a chatat. Now you did it for a chatat, you did in the right place of a chatat, but you did the actions like an olah, then it's psula, disqualified. If you did it k'ma'aseh olah l'shem olah, you took a chatat, you designated it to be a chatat, you did it down below, but when you sacrificed it, right, when you, let's say, did the malika, you did it like the actions of an olah, and you did mitzvah, right, whatever that might be, and you did it l'shem olah, you did it with the intent to be an olah, it's psula, because of course, right, if ma'aseh olah l'shem chatat or ma'aseh chatat l'shem olah is psula, obviously this one's going to be psula. So all those cases are psula. Now we go to the second half of the chatat of case. What if you did it as alamala? What if you did it on the top part of the altar, which is not the place you're supposed to do it? Kema aseh kulam psula. Now we know why we brought the first case, because now if you do it kema aseh chatat l'shem chatat, everything else is done properly, but you did it on top, no good. And obviously all the other cases which were psulim, even if you did them down below, for sure they're going to be psulim if you did them up on top. Okay, there's no even question there. Now we move to the olat ha'of. Olat ha'of sh'asa lamala k'ma'aseh olah l'shem olah. Okay, that's your perfect case. You do an olah. up top where you're supposed to do the Ola, right? This one obviously starts up top because that's the right place. Do the exact same structure. You do it you do it up top, all the actions like an Ola. And for the purposes of an Ola, obviously it's Kshera. And even if you do Kimase Ola L'Shem Chatat, it's Kshera. Why is that? Because an Ola Shelo Lishma is Kshera. Ubavad Shelo Atala Ba'alea. What do we just know though? Well, the owner didn't fulfill their obligation. That goes back to the very first mission of Zevachim, because an Ola Shelo Lishma is Kshera, but it doesn't fulfill the obligation of the owner, but it is Kshera. If you do K'maaseh Chatat L'Shem Ola, you do an Ola like a Chatat, just like you can't do a Chatat in the actions of an Ola, you can't do an Ola in the actions of a Chatat. So if you did it in the actions of a Chatat, you slaughtered it, let's say like a Chatat, you only did one Siman, or you did Haza'at Adam instead of Mitzui, but you had in mind you were doing it for an Ola, doesn't matter. It's Psula, because you didn't do it right. And obviously, K'maaseh Chatat L'Shem Chatat is Psula, if you do it like a Chatat for the purposes of a chatat. Of course, it's psula because if K'maaseh Chatat L'Shem Ola is psula, then obviously you do it for in the actions of a chatat, in the name of a chatat, it's going to be psula. Asan lamata. Now, what if you did the olat ha'of down below, which is not where you're supposed to do it? So again, K'maaseh kulam psula. Okay, it's going to be completely disqualified. Now the Gemara is going to ask the following question: Dishane b'mai. Okay, so now we're going to do the same question for the first part, and the same question for the second part, meaning the first part for the chatat and the second part for the ola. So now we want to know chatat of, and the real case we're going to be focusing on, and this is why I bolded it on top. Okay, for the chatat it's going to be this case, for the ola it's going to be this case. Okay, we'll see in a minute. Chatat of that you did K'maaseh ola l'shem chatat is psula. Okay, now again there were a lot of cases that were psulim, but that's the one we'll focus on, and you'll see why in a minute. So we're on Amabet now. Deshane b'mai. What did you change here? Ilema deshane b'malika. If we're saying that you did malika wrong, okay. In other words, before now I was saying you did malika or haza'ah, right? We don't know what you did wrong. You did maybe mitzvah, not haza'ah. So that's going to be our question. Did you do the malika wrong, or did you do the sprinkling wrong? That instead of sprinkling, you did mitzvah, and that's why it was like the ola. So what we're going to have is, just to tell you the structure, we're going to have a suggested answer that we're going to reject. It's with an ilema. My ilema is always, if you're going to say we're going to reject it. However, they're going to question the rejection. And maybe it will still stand. And then we're going to have the second answer. And we're going to have a proof that that must be the right answer. But that actually we're going to reject. Okay, so let's go. Ilema deshani b'malika. If it's that you did the malika, which means what? What did you do? You severed both simanim and cut the head completely. If that's what you did, then what's the problem? What does it say here? It's disqualified. Now, what did we learn in the previous sugya? According to Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon, it's not disqualified. So the Gemara is going to say, then this Mishnah, Nema de lo Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon, Da'amar shamati shemavdilim b'chatat of. If you say the disqualification here, what he did when he did the chatat of like the ola, and we're going to say it's disqualified, right? Even if it was l'shem chatat, right? Even if you did it for the purposes of a chatat, it's disqualified. Well, that doesn't make any sense because that's going to be not like Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon. Because what did Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon say? I heard that you can do havdalah b'chatarof and it won't be disqualified. So now we don't want to say our Mishnah is not like Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon. We'd much rather have our Mishnah match all the opinions. To which the Gemara says, I don't get what's bothering you about that. V'lo kimna deloka Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon. Didn't we say the previous Mishnah wasn't Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon? That's what we started in Samachayim Bet. We said matnitin deloka Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon. So if the previous Mishnah didn't follow his opinion, who cares if this Mishnah doesn't follow his opinion? That's not such a big deal. Okay. So, and also, by the way, it makes sense. If one Mishnah doesn't follow him, it makes sense that the next Mishnah wouldn't follow him as well. So, okay. But the Gemara says lo. Now, lo here doesn't really mean no, no way, no how. It doesn't say we're rejecting the first option. It could be it's talking about Malika, and it could be the Mishnah is not like Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon. But we prefer the Gemara is saying to explain it according to everybody, which is lo. Dishane b'haza'ah. If you want to explain it like everybody, you could say the change was that you did, instead of haza'ah, you did mitzvah. You didn't sprinkle the blood, you squeezed the blood. And that's the maaseh olah. So you took a chatat off. Again, remember, you did it down below where it's the right place. You did it l'shem chatat, but you squeeze the blood instead of sprinkling it, and that's what's going to disqualify your korban. And now they're going to prove this, and like I said, we're going to bring a proof for this but then we're going to reject the proof. Hachinami mistabra. Why? Midikatane seifa. It says asa'a lamala kemase kulam psula. Right, by the chatat. That was the last case in the chatat. If you do it above, in all, right, like all those other ways, it's psula. Va'afilu, and even, right, what's included in that case? Kimase chatat l'shem chatat, right? Also, maseh chatat l'shem chatat is included in those cases, right? Meaning that first case, if you did everything right, maseh chatat l'shem chatat, it's kshera. But if you did that lamala, it's going to be psula. Okay. So now the question is, dishane b'mai. Now, so now, what was the case that you switched there? Okay, when you did it lamala. Now, ilema. Now, what the whole problem here in that case, where nothing else is wrong, there's only one thing wrong. What's that thing that's wrong? You did it up above. What did you do at the top of the altar? We could say the two critical things, the malika or the blood. Now what we're going to prove is it's not going to be malika, it's going to be the sprinkling. And if it's the sprinkling, in that case, okay, now we're going to say like this. We're trying to figure out what's the case of chatat of k'maaseh olah l'shem chatat. And then we're going to prove that we know what case the asa alamala k'maaseh kulan is psula if you did maaseh chatat l'shem chatat. So then we're going to assume that's the same case in the previous section, okay? Because they're like one continuum. So if this case is that, this case must be that also. So the way we're going to figure out was it mitzoy or haza'ah, right? We're going to now say this is k'maaseh olah l'shem chatat is going to be mitzoy. How do we know? Or haza'ah, same thing, right? It's you did mitzoy instead of sprinkling. That's going to be learned out from asa alamala k'maaseh kulan is psula, because again, what we're talking about here is you went up to the top, you did it l'shem chatat, you did it the way the chatat's supposed to be done, you did everything right. So what did you do wrong? You went up top. Well, what did you do up top? If it is that you went and did the malika up top, hamarmar, now we have to go back to Daf Samach Gimel. Daf Samach Gimel at the bottom, we went back to this Mishnah. The Mishnah said, B'koma koma tak kshera. All the cases, in anywhere you want to do it, it's kshera, but zeh hayam koma, but this was its place. And then they said, if you remember, what does that mean? How do you say B'koma koma kshera, but this was its place? And they differentiate there and they say, hamarmar, they say what could be done anywhere is the malika. What can't be done anywhere is the sprinkling. So now we can go re-explain this line when it says you did it up above. Like the chatat, l'shem chatat, everything else was right, but you did above. What did you do above? It wasn't malika, because if you did the malika above, but the sprinkling down below, it's actually kshera. So we need to find a case where it's going to be disqualified just because you did it above. Well, then obviously, alalav deshane b'hazai must be that you you did the sprinkling up on top, and that was your problem. And therefore, they say midaseifa b'hazah resha nami b'hazah. So now comes the big jump, which I already told you we're going to do, which is if this case hasa'ala mala k'maseh kulam psula, in the case of you did everything else right, has to be the sprinkling we're talking about was done above, then it must be that when you did it below, like in Ola, we must be talking about the sprinkling as well. And that's why, again, we had two reasons to think it's a sprinkling. One is because if it's Malika, then it won't go like Rabbi Lezer or Rabbi Shimon, which we were, in the end, really so bothered by. Okay, so it won't be like Rabbi Lezer or Rabbi Shimon, like the previous Mishnah. But the other is that based on the context of the Mishnah, from the later case, we can learn about the earlier case. To which the Gemara rejects that proof and says, Midi Iria, Hakadita Vakadita. What do you mean? This one, right? That case could be talking about Haza'ah, the Maaseh Olah L'Shem. That case could be talking about Malika. You switched, you did the Malika like the Ola and you did Havdalah. And this case could be Asa Alamala. Okay, fine. That's obviously only the blood, okay? And not the Malika, because the Malika could be done anywhere. So either which way, we end up with these two answers. We can't really prove the second answer, and we can't really disregard the first answer, so we're kind of left without any real clear clarification. Okay? Now, again, you could just answer like this. If you want to make the Mishnah like everybody, then you're going to have to say Haza'ah. If you want to make it that it doesn't follow Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon, you could say it's about Malika. Okay, now we get to the next sugya, but before we get to this next sugya, we really have to learn the next Mishnah. So we're going to go and learn the next Mishnah first, and then we're going to come back. So the next Mishnah says, "V'kulan ein mitamim bebeit habliya u'moalim behem." Now, what they're going to say is like this. Oh, okay, we need a bit of background. There's tumat beit habliya. What's tumat beit habliya? It's a nevela of a kosher bird. Okay, nevela of an animal generally is tummy. So an animal dies without proper shechita, it carries tumah. If I touch it or carry it without touching it, but let's say it's on a tray and I move it, so I'm tummy. Nevela of tahor, a kosher bird, has a different kind of tumah. It's called tumat beit habliya. While it's in my mouth, while I'm eating it, let's say I eat it, I shouldn't eat it. It's a nevela, it's a non-kosher bird. It wasn't slaughtered properly. While I eat it, and it's in my mouth, it's matame, my clothes, and I'm tameh at that time. Now, what removes it from being a nevela like this, right? A proper slaughtering. In the temple, what makes it not a nevela? Malika, because malika is like shechita, but it's done in the temple, right? Malika isn't done outside the temple, by the way, and shechita isn't done inside the temple, right? So outside the temple, shechita removes it from being a nevela. Inside the temple, it's malika. But what if it's a malika psula? Our Mishnah just listed a whole bunch of cases where if I did the malika in this way, right, or this bird gets disqualified. But comes the Mishnah and says, all these cases, there's no tumat beit habliya, okay? Because there was a malika done. There was a proper malika, even though there were things wrong with it, like I did the ola l'shem chatat, I did this, I did it wrong. Either I did the malika wrong or I did the hazah wrong, but either which way, it doesn't affect nevela. It's not going to be a nevela because malika was done. So it might not fulfill my korban, and it might be disqualified korban, but that is not, if I happen to eat it, it's not going to carry that impurity. And another thing, mo'alim behem. What's me'ila? Misuse of consecrated property. Now, normally an ola always has me'ila. Before, after, right? At any stage, there's me'ila. A chatat, if you remember, after you do the blood, what happens? The meat is permitted to the kohanim. So usually, after the blood is sprinkled, the me'ila is removed, right? There's no me'ila anymore because now the kohanim can eat. There's no misuse of consecrated property. It's allowed to kohanim at this point. So me'ila is removed at that point once you sprinkle the blood. In these cases, since you'll never be allowed to eat it, right, and it never becomes permitted to the kohanim, the me'ila remains on the sacrifice. So it's a disqualified sacrifice, but it still has laws of me'ila because it never got to a point where someone could eat it. Now, the ola, of course, is going to always have me'ila, but the chiddush here is even the chatat doesn't get the me'ila removed, okay, because it never gets that permission for kohanim to eat it. Chutz mi, except for one case, chatat ha'of sha'asa'a lemata k'maseh chatat l'shem chatat. Okay, that's obvious. That was the case that was done properly. The chatat that was done l'shem chatat, the way of a chatat, it's all kosher, and that the me'ila is removed as soon as you finish everything because the kohanim can eat it. Okay. Now, here we're going to have a machloket, though. This is important to understand. Olat ha'of sha'asa'a lemata k'maseh chatat l'shem chatat. Now, what if you did an olat ha'of? But everything about it, okay, go back to our game of set. Everything's wrong. You did completely wrong. You took this ola, so it was designated for a burnt offering, but you did it down below instead of above. You did it, all the actions were like a chatat, or we don't know what actions, but the actions were done like a chatat, okay? And you did it for the sake of a chatat. So you treated it completely like a chatat, even though originally when you designated the bird, you said, I'm bringing this as a burnt offering. So it was designated a burnt offering, but you did it completely like a chatat. So now the question is going to be, is me'ila removed? Now you definitely won't be able to eat this animal because it's disqualified korban. Remember, it's in the list of disqualified korbanot. But there's going to be a machloket about was me'ila removed here. Okay, so Rabbi Eliezer Omer, mo'alim ba. Eliezer says there's still me'ila because it never gets permitted to the kohanim, so there's me'ila. Rabbi Yoshua Omer, ein mo'alim ba. He says the me'ila prohibition is removed. Why? Well, what he basically says is you're morphing this into a chatat because you did everything about it like a chatat. So the me'ila is going to be removed because we basically treat it like a chatat. Now, Rabbi Eliezer didn't really understand this properly. And Rabbi Eliezer said, I don't understand, okay? And we start a conversation between them. And it's going to continue into tomorrow's daf. I'm not going to read the rest of the Mishnah here, but I'm going to read till the end of today's daf. And this is also what we need for the earlier section, because we did skip right now. Amar Rabbi Eliezer, ma'im chatat. He's going to bring a logical argument. Wait a minute. A chatat that was originally designated as a chatat. She'ein mo'alim ba lishma. If you do it right, it's not going to have Me'ila down the road. But yet Kishashinat Shema, but when you switch it to an Ola, what happens? Well, everyone agrees, Mo'alimba, right? The Me'ila doesn't get removed because you did it like an Ola. So Ola, Shemo'alim Balishma. So don't you think our case should be even more severe? Because our case is an Ola, which wasn't intended ever for the Me'ila to be removed. In a case of Chata, the Me'ila was supposed to be removed at some point. And yet we don't remove it when you do it L'Shem Ola. So why don't you think that if we start with Ola and we do it L'Shem Chata, where it wasn't going to be removed in the first place, the Me'ila, right? So Ein Odin Shiyimaluba. Don't you think then when you Kishishinachma, when you did it L'Shem Chatat and you did it all like a Chatat, don't you think that of course it's going to stay in its original state of Me'ila? Basically, what he's saying is we're obviously going to be more strict with Me'ila. When you started off as an Ola, Ola has a stricter deen. To which he kind of missed what Rabbi Yeshua was saying. Amar Rabbi Yeshua lo. Because you didn't understand what I was saying. Remember what I said. Rabbi Yeshua is basically saying if you start it out as a chata, and yes, originally it was an ola, but then you do everything like a chatat. So you kind of make it a chatat, and that's why the me'ila is removed. So he says, Lo amamarta b'chatan sheshinat shma l'shem ola. Sheken shinat shma l'davar sheyesh bo milah. The problem is you went from chatat to an ola. You went to a situation, in the first case you brought me, that was a chatat that became an ola. And obviously if it becomes an ola, we're going to be more severe with it because what it later became was an ola. And what's bothering Rabbi Eliezer is what you started with. He's saying, no, it's what you made it into. Sheken shinat shma, you switched its name to something sheyesh bo milah. But you're going to say the Tomar Bola. Well, you can't say the same thing for an Ola. Sheshinat Shma L'Shem Chatat. You switch this into a Chatat. And a Chatat, generally, there's no Me'ila after the blood is sprinkled. So Sheken Shinat Shma L'Davar She'en Bo Me'ila. You switch it to something that doesn't have Me'ila. Now, the Gemara is later going to say, and this is going to be necessary for our continuation, which is, it's obvious that what Rabbi Yeshua is saying is you basically morphed it into a chatat. Now, when is that going to work? Now, what's the shinoi here? It's going to have to be the shinoi is malika, because if you did malika for an ola and the way you do it for an ola, then it's already more defined as an ola. We need something that is defined from a chatat from the beginning, and that's not from the beginning, but when you start the malika. So we're going to assume that this Mishnah, just have in your head, this Mishnah is talking about malika specifically, okay? If you switched Malika, that's when Rabbi Yeshua is going to say there's no Me'ila. If you did Malika like an Ola, and then switched to a Chatat, you did the sprinkling, let's say, instead of the Mitzvah, he's not going to say the same thing. Okay, that's just some background. Now we're going to go back to our sugya. I'm going to bring back the chart. So now we're going back to the Olat Ha'of. Okay, the Olat Ha'of, Sha'asa'at. Now the real case that's going to interest us here, they just say B'chule, but the real case that's going to interest us is that you did it like a chatat l'shem chatat, which is the exact case of the next Mishnah, okay? And that's obviously they're talking about all the cases, but even this case, if you did it completely wrong, you did it, well, not completely, because you did it lamala, but kemaseh chatat l'shem chatat, or maybe even it's lamata l'shem chatat. It's a good question. Anyway, we'll talk about this soon. Dishane b'mai. Okay, so what did you do like a chatat? So now they're going to say, ilema dishane b'malika, if you did it the malika. Well, what does it say in the next line? Right. Remember now, if you switch Malika, what's Rabbi Yeshua going to say? If you switch it to Malika, it's a Moalim. Okay? So now we're going to say the following. Just one second. I want to check one thing. Yeah, this should be Lamata. Okay. Sorry. I'm going to cross this out. It should be Asa Lamata, because that's the case Rabbi Yeshua disagrees about the Me'ila. So now, if we say this case in our Mishnah, again, don't get confused which Mishnah. Our Mishnah says, Ola Ha'of, you did it lamata. Kimaseh chatat l'shem chatat is psula. Now, what did you change? Well, if you change malika, ilem edishani b'malika, midikatani seifa, the next Mishnah says, kulan, all these cases, ein metamim b'beit blia u'moalim bahem. So now we're going to say, Nema deloka Rabbi Yeshua, di ka Rabbi Yeshua ha'amar ein moalim. If you say you switched to, right, you did the wrong thing in Malika in that stage, Rabbi Yeshua says there is no Me'ila. And that line said, all these cases, Mo'alim Bahim. And Rabbi Yeshua said no, which means our Mishnah, again, this is the same structure as before. We don't like to say that because on this Mishnah, it doesn't match. It doesn't fit with everyone's opinion. And we'd rather a Mishnah that fits with everyone's opinion. So now they're going to bring another answer that they're also going to reject. But in the end, they're going to reject the rejection here. But Ve'ela b'mitzvah. Wait, so you want to say the change was b'mitzvah? But that doesn't make sense because if we're going to say, now, you can see there's a chart here at the bottom. There's three Mishnayot, and we're in the middle one right now, right? Olada of that you did. Lamata, kemaseh kulam, right? Even maseh chatap b'shem chatap psula is going to be sprinkling. That's what we want to say, meaning you sprinkled the blood instead of mitzvah. Well, what's the problem? Ema seifa, look at the seifa. Olata of shasa lamata kemaseh chatat l'shem chatat. Rabbi Eliezer moalim ba, Rabbi Shoya moalim ba. Look at the next Mishnah. If you say our Mishnah is talking about mitzvah, I wrote haza'ah here. It doesn't matter. It's the same, meaning instead of mitzvah, you did haza'ah. So if you're going to say this is talking about haza'ah, well, the next Mishnah about the machloket Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua, deshane b'mai, we already said it's not ilema b'mitzvah imar da'amar Rabbi Yeshua deshane b'malika b'mitzvah mi'amar. Now that's what I told you before. That when Rabbi Yeshua says you take this olat ha'of, but you did everything like a chatat, we obviously mean when you started with malika like a chatat. So this case is talking about you did it malika. And our Mishnah would be talking about haza'ah. Then we have a problem because again, this is all within saying that our Mishnah is mitzvah. And now we're going to see the problem because we're now going to say reisha v'seifa b'malika mitziata b'mitzvah. Okay, now we have to go back to the previous Mishnah. So we're now going to take the three Mishnayot. This is why I said this is all one continuum. The Mishnah in the end of the last chapter said, Hivdil b'chatat v'lo hivdil ba'olah pasul. Now, what's that? That's a case where you did the chatat and the olah wrong. At what stage did you do it wrong? Obviously, malika, because it's talking about lavdil. We're going to take the last Mishnah that we just learned now, which is olah ha'ov sh'asa lamata. Rabbi Yeshua says, moalim. That we already said, Rabbi Yeshua is only going to say there's no me'ila in that unique case where everything was done right is when you did the malika like a chatat. So that's malika. So if you want to say that we don't want to make our Mishnah malika because then it won't fit with Rabbi Yeshua's opinion because of that next line in the next Mishnah, kulam emitamim bebeda blia umoalim ahem, then you're going to have a problem. Because then you're going to say our Mishnah is about mitzvah or haza'ah, right? About the sprinkling of the blood. And then it just doesn't make sense. You're going to have the previous Mishnah, the topic was malika. This Mishnah, the topic is sprinkling. And that Mishnah, the topic is malika. That doesn't seem to match. To which the Gemara says, so what? Yes. Each one is talking about different changes. That one's you switched in malika. This one you switched in the sprinkling of the blood. That one you switched in malika. That's fine. We don't really have a problem with that. Okay, and with that, we finish our daf because we already did the Mishnah. So now we're going to do a review, okay? It's a little complicated, that whole section, but we'll do a review. So we started with this issue of Rabbi Yirmiyah's approach to the whole Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Shimon's opinion about lo yavdil. We thought it meant, right, lo yavdil, and then Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Shimon said you can, right? But what we really mean, right, we had those three different interpretations about what the possible issue could be and why he doesn't agree with that, and it all has to do with doing it in the wrong way. Rabbi Yirmiyah said it had nothing to do with that. It just has to do with the way he simply read the pasuk. He read the pasuk as lo yavdil, you don't have to lavdil. Question that from Bor. We said, no, that's not really a question. Moved on to the critical part being mitzvah guf and not mitzvah ha-rosh. And then we figured out where we got that from the pasuk, olah, who. One is limiting, one is including more. And with that, we finished the parak. Then we move to these cases of doing the korbanot in the wrong way, all the different possible permutations. Most of them are going to be psulim, we said, right? There's some unique ones that are ksherim. Ola shalol lishma, and the obviously the ola and the chatat when they're done exactly the way they're supposed to be done. Other than that, everything else was disqualified. And then we tried to figure out in the chatat case, right? Specifically, if you remember, the chatat, l'shem, chatat, if you did the chatat, let's just review it here. You did the chatat, kima aseh olah, l'shem chatat, meaning everything was right except for that one thing, kima aseh olah. What's the maaseh olah? Well, we don't want to say malika because that goes against Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Shimon. So it must be haza'ah, and we try to prove it. Again, it was a little bit weak because we tried to prove it. This is the same structure in both, really. One was to say if we go that way, we're not going to be l'kulei alma, according to everybody. And the other one, that way, it's going to either yes or not connect with the other Mishnayot in terms of topics, to which I said, okay, we don't really care if you switch topics. This one could be bit malika, that one could be haza'ah. It doesn't really bother us. So that's what we did really in both. And we went to the olada of that you did lamata, k'maseh chatat l'shem chatat, where it was also completely wrong. And the question is, what did you switch? If it's Malika, then it's not going to be like Rabbi Yeshua, because it also says in the next Mishnah that Moalim in all these cases. And if that's the case, well, you're not Moalim according to Rabbi Yeshua in that case if you switch Malika. So it must be Mitzoy, but if you say Mitzoy, it's weird. You're going to have first Mishnah was Malika, then Mitzoy, then Malika. That's also strange. But the Gemara says, yeah, that doesn't really bother us so much. And with that, we finish our daf and stop here. Pick up with the sugya tomorrow. We'll pick up back with the discussion between Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Eliezer. And that's, again, what we saw in the Mishnah then was that case of, in general, this Malika works enough to get it out of Beta Blia. And there is Me'ila, though, right? It doesn't remove the Me'ila for the Chatat, right? Except for, right, they had some exceptions. And then this Machloka between Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Eliezer about whether that unique case of the Olat HaOv Sha'asalamata Kima Se Chatat L'Shem Chatat, it was completely like a Chatat. Rabbi Yeshua saw this as morphing into a Chatat, and the Me'ila would be removed, whereas Rabbi Eliezer doesn't say that. And just remember, even though he says there's no Me'ila, Rabbi Yeshua, he doesn't really seem to think that you can eat the meat. He just thinks that the Me'ila is removed. With that, we finish for today. Wishing everyone a good day.